You're listening to the AfricaMusicLaw.com show with Miss Uduak, episode number 11. AfricaMusicLaw.com, your number one go-to destination for celebrity legal drama, music business, and industry news. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the AfricaMusicLaw.com show. From Sony, California, USA, it's your one and only certified game changer, Miss Uduak. I'm a fashion and entertainment lawyer with the law firm of AB2 Law Group PC. The AfricaMusicLaw.com show is a show that is about the business of empowering the African artists and other creative talents in the fashion and entertainment industry, both here in the U.S. and across the African continent. So, here's how we do it. We take on the latest in celebrity legal drama, music business, and industry news, and we provide legal and business commentary and analysis on some of the most interesting topics where you see the intersection of pop culture and the law. We also invite our industry experts, our artists, and other cool people who we call the AML people, so African Music Law abbreviated. So they come on the show to share their insights with us in hopes that it benefits you all. You can subscribe on www.africamusiclaw.com to stay updated on when we publish our weekly podcast. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/AfricaMusicLaw, on Twitter with the Twitter handle AfricaMusicLaw, and of course you can follow me, the host, Miss Uduak, on my personal Twitter handle at UduakLaw. If you're interested in sponsoring the show or you want to appear as a guest, please feel free to hit me up at africamusiclaw@gmail.com. Hey y'all, how you doing? How's your week? How's your upcoming week? Are you prepared for the new week that's coming up? Hopefully you are. There's so much to talk about today. I'm really excited. We've got a great guest. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to go straight into the introduction of our guest. And it's just a lot of knowledge that he is going to be spitting. Artists, entrepreneurs, take out your notepads. I want you to take notes. He's going to be dropping a lot of knowledge, and we will be right back. You're listening to the AfricaMusicLaw.com show with your one and only Miss Uduak. We'll be right back. You're listening to the AfricaMusicLaw.com show with Miss Uduak. Welcome back, everyone. Our guest today is quite interesting guest. I'm glad that we have him on because I think he's going to shed a lot of light in terms of the musical landscape in Nigeria and Africa as a whole. I'm talking about the Chief Marketing Officer at Spinlet, Africa's foremost digital music company, who goes by the name Mark Redguard. Actually, beyond being the CMO for Spinlet, Mark also has some interesting, extensive background in the music industry. Currently, he's also the CEO of the 9060 Music Group, an interesting business model that he's created for the first time in Nigeria. We're going to talk about that. His work industry experience also includes work with the likes of Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Jennifer Lopez, Jazzy Jeff, and Will Smith, among so many clients. He's also worked with top music record labels here in the U.S., from Universal to EMI to Sony, and so much more. So, Mark, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's always interesting to see when you have Americans, particularly. I know you have the Jamaican heritage background, but Americans relocate to Africa and stay there and make that home for themselves. So it's a lot to talk about today. But how's your side, or how your side did, as we say in Pidgin English?
My side is very rainy, but good.
Have
Things are
you
going well.
have you managed to learn the language over in Nigeria?
I could understand it, but no, I haven't tried to mimic it. No.
Okay, so before we kick off more officially and talk about the business of music, let's do some inspirational talk. You're a business owner. I'm a business owner. We have a lot of entrepreneurs listening, including our artists, independent contractors, or indie entrepreneurs. What do you say to yourself to push you every day to get up and do what you do?
Well, where I am, it takes a lot of pushing because the it's a very new marketplace. It's very unstructured, but with the unstructuredness, there's a lot of opportunity. So I think every day is a new challenge. So it's really just waking up, kind of knowing there's a new slate every morning. If there were challenges, trials, and tribulations from the day before, it's just another opportunity to greenlight projects and make things happen. So that's really the inspiration that a lot of the road is untraveled, and it kind of gives you an opportunity to see what sort of headway you can make on a daily basis.
Okay. The other question I want to ask you, still along the lines of entrepreneurs and the many challenges that we face in trying to make our businesses thrive on a daily basis, is what has been the biggest challenge so far for you, especially in your new venture with 960 Music Group, but as a whole, as an entrepreneur, not as an executive with Spinlet, just generally as an entrepreneur?
I think it was coming into the market, and many times you have the perception that you know what the target market wants, you know what the landscape needs, or you see where the voids are. But many times there's still a disconnect between the product that you're trying to put out and the target. So we ran into some of that very early on from the technology side. I think we came in having a perspective from the US where you've got reasonably priced smartphones and you've got very good broadband. And when the technology was put together, there wasn't a easy fit in the marketplace. The
Are we
marketplace
talking
just wasn't
Spinlet?
ready.
Are we talking
Just in
Spinlet
general,
or just
yeah,
general? Okay,
yeah,
in general. Okay.
Spinlet, but in general, I think
Okay.
many times you enter a marketplace and you think you know what the consumers want, but many times you don't.
So let's actually transition and talk about Spinlet, and then we'll get into your professional background and then come back to 960 Music because I'm really intrigued by more so 960 Music Group than even Spinlet. Spinlet is literally right behind my backyard. I'm right here in Northern California, went to law school in San Francisco, so very familiar with San Francisco. And I understand that Spinlet now has a branch office, but I remember when Spinlet started, and there was just a lot of chaos, so to speak, trying to sort of establish themselves in the Nigerian market and trying to figure out what the landscape is. Could you paint the picture for our audience, especially those listening here in the US, that want to understand the digital distribution market that your company, Spinlet, met before taking all these interesting moves to establish itself?
Okay, sure. Well, in Nigeria in particular, and throughout Africa, you don't have brick and mortar stores like you'd have in the US where you can walk in, purchase a CD, or look at music. A lot of times that's just not there. You have a lot of informal setups. So if you are in a remote area of Nigeria and you record music, there's a strong possibility that your music is going to stay in that remote area. It's not going to travel 50, 60 miles to get on like your New York radio or your Atlanta radio. It's going to stay locked in that area. If it stays locked in that area, it puts artists in a position to have very limited monetization opportunities. So what Spinlet saw that there was a void in the marketplace, not only in Nigeria, but across Africa, where we said that we could leapfrog instead of trying to set up stores where people could go in and purchase. Why don't we take advantage of digital technology and use digital technology to increase the footprint of the different artists and their music to allow them now to be able to monetize or sell the music across pan-Nigeria, sub-Sahara Africa, and move into the diaspora. So we basically leapfrog and came in with a app that you would almost say was like an iTunes or Spotify for Africa that as long as you had a smartphone and you had broadband connectivity, anywhere you were in the world, you'd be able to access music through the app. So that's what we started off with, because we saw there was a void in the marketplace and looked at the supply demand, that there was a lot of demand for music, but the supply just wasn't getting there. As I said, if you were in an area, your music was limited to that area.
Well, hold on a sec on that thought, though, because I understand what you're saying on when you guys came in and how you looked the marketplace, but just a little history here. In 2006, I understand your company was established. 2011, you launched into the Nigerian market. But since 2006, the likes of Not Just Okay, Giddy Lounge, among many, were already doing what you came into the marketplace to do and creating this digital footprint that became this huge thing that people were like, wow, the opportunities abound. Your company got in, iRockin got in. So my question for you is, when you came in and already saw a lot of that traction that was already there, what did you feel really distinguished you from the other ones that were already out there doing the digital footprint part?
Well, a few things. One was that we didn't limit ourselves to Nigerian music. We were looking at ourselves as the premier African music portal. So wherever you were in Africa, there was an opportunity to sell your music through our system. And then secondly, we were offering both streaming, downloading, and a la carte purchases, which the others weren't. And then we were setting it up for, again, artists to monetize their music. With a lot of those platforms, they just offered free downloads, and many of them still do offer only free downloads. So I think we came in and differentiated ourselves on a number of fronts, and I strongly believe that we offered a service that none of them were offering, and still most of them don't.
Okay. So explain more so as for the African music law artists listening to this, interested in your service, what does it entail? When an artist comes into the Spinlet, the Spinlet reality, what is the first step that happens to get their music to be mass distributed through your company?
Well, the first thing we would do we would send out an introduction to try to encourage all artists to put their music on the platform, whether they're an unestablished artist or an A-list artist. The content team would then meet with them and give them what you would call a non-exclusive digital distribution agreement that allows them to sign with Spinlet, where we now have a license to sell their music digitally on our platform in any territory. And for that, there would be a revenue share, a 60-40 split, 60% in favor of the artist, 40% in favor of Spinlet. And because the platform operates in a few different angles, one, you have a la carte, where you could purchase a song outright. So again, that would be the 60-40 split. The same thing from downloading. When revenues come in, there would be a 60-40 split. And then we also have a free ad stream, where if you listen to an ad for about 10 to 15 seconds, the revenue that comes in off of that ad would also be split 60-40. So it's a very simple agreement that just locks them in for 5 years in a non-exclusive agreement, where if another company comes and someone offers them a deal that says they want to do exclusive, they just give us 30 days notice, and then we could take all of their music down if that's the case. So that's it in a nutshell, really a 60-40 split, and revenues paid out quarterly based on earnings from any of those three channels.
Okay, as to the non-exclusive, if another competitor comes and they want to enter into yet another non-exclusive agreement with, say, iRockin, is there a need to then take down all the material or content they currently have on your site? Can't both agreements coexist?
Yes, both agreements could coexist, and they don't even have to inform us. The only way they would inform us is if they felt that another company gave them such an offer that that company was requiring that the music be taken down from Spinlet. But we can coexist with every agreement in the marketplace.
Okay. Another thing, I have had a chance to look at your agreements over time. What I don't understand is the jurisdiction. And for people listening, jurisdiction simply means the venue. If things go wrong, some of your contracts include Mauritius as a venue. Why is that as opposed to Nigeria?
Well, the main reason for that is because despite the fact that there are laws governing copyright within Nigeria, we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where you enter into the legal forum and for some reason, whether someone knows someone or someone has more influence, it puts us in an awkward position. And what we wanted to do was to make sure that we had a venue that was neutral. So a lot of our banking is done in Mauritius, so we decided to use Mauritius as a location for incorporation as well as the legal forum for any disputes.
That's because I was like, okay, you have a San Francisco office, you're out of Finland, so I didn't understand the connection. Okay, that explains it and makes sense. Let's get into, I remember the very first major project that Spinlet had, which was the EME album that came out. And there was there were a lot of issues with respect to the technology where streaming would be easy for people to access, and a lot of people were not happy about it. What was that about, and how has that been resolved?
Well, that was one of the first major projects, and what we tried to do, we looked at WizKid, we looked at Banky W, we looked at Scales and the entire roster, and they had a project coming out, and we thought this would be a very good marketing tool if we had it on the platform and we had it exclusive for a certain amount of time. That would then attract eyeballs to get folks to come to the platform, get an opportunity to, engage with the user experience and use that as a way to create, to show that the platform was sticky and it had a lot to offer. But again, we're dealing with technology and we're dealing with quite a few challenges within the marketplace. And the album went up. And when the album went up, there were a few glitches on our side. And unfortunately, our technical team was out of Finland. So it took a little while between the server and the technical team to resolve some of the issues. But I think that was within 24 to 48 hours. But because we had a lot of traffic and a lot of interest, sure, there was frustration within 24 to 48 hours, but anyone who does anything with technology, they would understand. And especially if you're familiar with the Nigerian market between calls dropping, broadband, connection problems. So we looked at it and we did apologize to the marketplace, but it's par for the course. Technology, and you have glitches from time to time. So that was the issue, but it was resolved, and since then we've had no major issues with the platform.
Okay, so now let's talk about Alaba Market, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If you're not, for listeners, essentially that's basically the distribution market, local distribution market for music and film when it comes to the entertainment industry in Nigeria. The question we've been having over and over again, it keeps coming up, is certainly one I've asked. Other artists feel that we're in the industry at large. How can we have a company like Spinlet exist, thrive, and at the same time artists dealing with the issues of piracy but still finding Alaba Market to be most effective in distributing their music? How can we have some sort of synergy that ultimately takes us to the direction that will have artists truly getting compensated for their work and their intellectual property?
Okay, well, the Alaba market plays a very key role within Nigeria. As I mentioned, there are no brick and mortar stores. So what Alaba does, they work with probably anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 informal distributors, meaning folks that may walk up to you on the side of the road with about 50 to 75 albums that they're selling. Or if you go to a food market or a market, you'll see different vendors, whether it's at the airport and the like. And most of them get their product through Alaba. So what Alaba does, it sits with the different artists and then it negotiates a deal where they say, we'll pay X amount of Naira in exchange for rights to exclusively license your product and sell it through our vendors. So what we found is, but for Alaba, most of the artists wouldn't be in a position to have their music distributed or played. And it becomes very important because Nigeria has about 167 to about 170 million folks. about 70% of the population is under the age of 35, and probably about 80% of the population may live on an average of like $2 per day. So when you look at a company like Spinlet, or you look at digital distribution, it's really for the high-end market. Someone, number one, who could afford a smartphone, who could afford data, and then has the ability and the time to download and access the music. So what Alaba does, it really serves as a gap distributor. They come in and they make sure that the product is everywhere throughout Nigeria in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. So they meet the buyer's needs. And as I said, what they do, most of the deals are above board. They enter into a licensing agreement, and then they say that we're going to manufacture 50,000, 100,000 units. The issue comes in where you actually don't know what the end number of units are that were manufactured. So if the album picks up and you thought it was only 50,000, maybe they ended up manufacturing 150,000. But they've got a very tight system where if you sign with one, they make sure that the others don't pirate the music. So it's been the informal system that's working. And as I say, Spinlet comes in and coexists, because if you could afford a smartphone and you could afford data, that's where digital comes in. But if you can't afford it and you're still using CDs, or you've got a preference for CDs, that's where the Alaba market comes in.
Let me take you a different direction and talk about intellectual property rights. Specific to your platform and in general, your knowledge since you've been in Nigeria, and you do, of course, also share a legal background. You attended law school locally here, correct, in the U.S.?
Yes, I went to Rutgers, Newark.
Okay, did you get a chance to practice out here, or you just went straight back into the business world?
No, I practiced entertainment law. Sure.
Okay, awesome. And what state?
In New York and New Jersey.
Okay, great. Awesome. So yes, so you're very, very familiar with what we're about to get into, which is the performance rights organizations in Nigeria. Certainly online, when you're talking digital, we have Sound Exchange and other ways here in the U.S. that we are trying to get artists compensated for work that's distributed online. In Nigeria, we've got COSON, the Copyright Society of Nigeria, that handles all that. And there's been a lot of tension with being able to be compensated for the work of artists who are signed to COSON. Can you shed some light on how Spinlet has been working with COSON, if at all, and what your take is on that major thorny issue of intellectual property rights and compensation with respect to PROs?
Yeah, with Nigeria, you have a lot of laws on the books, but a lot of them haven't really been executed. And I think one of the issues, as you had mentioned, is public performance. When artists take their music to the radio stations, many times it's the same thing that you may have had or continue to have in the U.S. They have to engage in payola, where they end up having to pay in order for an on-air presenter to give them rotation or give them high rotation so the music could get known, promoters could hear the music, and subsequently want to book them for shows and performances. That has been the trend, and it tends to happen quite often. What COSON has done, they've tried to come in and say, we could police the airwaves and put artists in a position where they could collect money from radio stations if the radio stations pay a license fee. So every time the music is played, there's some sort of register that indicates that my song has been played 500 times across pan Nigeria, and that equates to whatever the pro rata would be of the licenses that the different radio stations have entered into. But a lot of the radio stations have fought that. They've really said, we're doing the artists a service. We're promoting their music. We're playing their music. So they really shouldn't share in any of the advertising revenue that comes in. So most of them have fought it. COSON has taken quite a few of them to court. And there appears to be an agreement where they've come up with the different ratios that they would use to determine what one radio station pays versus another radio station. So at this point in time, the issue should have been resolved, but I don't know if the issue as it relates to the money that Cosign gets, how it's divided and how it's prorated among the artists. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty there. So you still have a lot of artists that are frustrated to say, what is Cosign really doing? But because they were, I would almost say, the initiator or the pioneer in taking the radio stations to court, they probably still need a little time to sort of level the playing field. But as it relates to Spinlet and Cosign, we don't have any relationship with them. What we've been doing is licensing the music directly from the artist, and then licensing the music from the content owner, and then paying the monies to the content owner to say if the songwriters or the writers of the music, in addition to the artist, is owed money. We then put the onus on them to determine what the copyright split would be, because a lot of times paperwork isn't a priority within the intellectual arena here. So a lot of artists go into the studio with producers, they record a song, and then there's no paper trail.
Yeah.
So instead of us now taking a position that we're going to pay one entity that says that they have some content ownership, we just go with the one individual that signed the contract and have a legal relationship between them.
What about the record labels? How do they come in? I'm presuming some of the content providers will be the artists directly, some of the music producers, as well as the record labels. Are you having relationships with record labels? And also, what's your general take with the fragmentation of record labels over there in Nigeria?
Well, what we prefer to do is to deal directly with the artist. And then if the artist says, almost through a letter of direction, pay the record label and then we'll get paid, we would prefer to take that route. There are a lot of unstructured companies, and they hold themselves out as management companies or record labels. And then when we enter into an agreement with them, the artists that were signed to them, they end up leaving a month later. And then payment would continue to come to that company, and then the artist wouldn't know, and then the artist comes back, they're disgruntled. So what we decided to do was to make a concerted effort to deal directly with the artist if possible. And if it wasn't possible, then we would deal with the record company. And there are quite a few structured ones, but there are a lot of them that really don't have the structure. The artist may not get the money, so to avoid liability, we make an effort to have the artist at least sign the agreement in addition to the record label.
Okay. All right. Wow. Very interesting stuff going on, and your ability to just see the landscape, been there for 5-6 years now, correct?
Well, in Nigeria with Spinlet or 960, I've been on this trip for going on 3 years now.
3 years.
But I've spent about 5 years in Johannesburg prior to this.
And we'll talk about that in a quick minute. Let me wrap it up on the Spinlet talk and get ready to transition into 960 music, because, again, I'm very intrigued about 960. With respect to Spinlet, I really like what your company has been doing. Of course, you've been involved as a CMO also with the educational angle. I remember when you all had the relationship with artists and South by Southwest to bring artists to get the exposure here in the U.S., in Texas, Austin, Texas. And then, of course, France also with MIDEM, which is, the largest, music conference for artists and all industry professionals. Tell us a bit about that angle, that educational angle that your company brings to the mix.
Well, what we've tried to do, number one, we wanted to expose artists to the international marketplace so they understand that it's a global marketplace. It's just not about selling your music in Benin, Calabar, or Lagos. That when you create a song and you make a music video, more likely than not, their aspiration is to get it on the big channels that are like cable channels like Channel O, MTV Base, Trace, Sound City. And all of these stations, they have viewership across sub-Saharan Africa, maybe in about 49 countries. So what we've always encouraged them to do is to monetize the music through the visibility that they get through music videos. So instead of just making a song and limiting it to Nigeria, if that video shows in South Africa, we've always said to them, all you've got to do is to build your fan base through social media and start engaging folks in the different countries where the music video gets played, and then encourage them to download through Spinlet so that you can monetize. But it's just not limited to sub-Saharan Africa. Everyone wants to get their music in the UK or get their music in the US. So we thought with Spinlet, it again gives us a footprint to now engage, market, and promote with folks in the diaspora, consumers who may have been away from Africa for a while, but there's still that connection to the music. So we bring the music right to their doorstep because it's digital. You upload, and 10 seconds later, the music is in the app. So what we've tried to do was take a few select artists to different countries and show them what the landscape looks like, what other artists are doing, so that at least there could be almost like a skill exchange. They kind of get a better understanding as to how artists conduct themselves at radio, how they do promotion, how they do a live performance, how they engage with fans during a live performance, etc. So that was a real reason to really give artists more exposure, whether it's through collaborations, workshops, live performance, or awards events, and with the hope that they bring that information back to the rest of Nigeria, get more folks excited, and again, make international and global one of their aspirations, to either connect with artists or sell their music or subsequently do shows and earn revenue off of the shows by having built a strong fan base. So that was that's really the educational aspect of what we've tried to do. Again, make the music more exportable and create that connection between Africa and the diaspora, and show artists how they could monetize and encourage fans to purchase the music, so artists don't get caught in a piracy web, but they actually make music off of the time and effort that they put into it.
You're listening to the AfricaMusicLaw.com show with Miss Uduak. Our guest today is Mark Redguard, CMO for Spinlet. We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to the AfricaMusicLaw.com show. And our guest today is Mark Redguard, CMO for Spinlet, CEO for 960 Music Group. Mark, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks for staying with us throughout the show. And everyone out there listening, thank you for listening. Mark, I want to talk about your group, 960 Music Group. I was fascinated by it because I was doing the research to prepare for even inviting you on to begin with. And then, of course, now that you're here, and I thought it was a very different business model. You've got this umbrella company, and it's basically acquiring, to some extent, I think 40% acquisition in Hypertech Music, which is Ife Omorigbe, and Two-Face also belonging to that music group. But basically, explain what you're doing with that, because I'm a bit intrigued. What's going on there?
Okay, well, as I had mentioned earlier, in the marketplace, you have a lot of record companies and you've got a lot of management companies, but a lot of times it's a 1-2-man operation. What you tend to find is an artist does pretty well, then they set up a record label. Once they set up the record label, they then find some emerging artists or some artists that they've got a good relationship with to have them sign to the label, and then they give them exposure by having them open at their shows or take them on red carpet events and the like. Many times they become overambitious, and they may have anywhere from 3 to 5 of those artists. The artists then get frustrated because they're not given individual attention. They can't put out as many singles, can't get as many supporting music videos as they'd like. So they end up getting frustration, and the relationship ends up dissolving. So what we thought, it would be a good idea to create an Uber label, like a master label that identifies companies or artists that are doing really well, either doing well by virtue of the income that they're already getting from monthly shows, or the possibility of already having an endorsement deal or becoming or getting close to getting an endorsement deal. And the reason for that is just to reduce the risk, to say that we want to do an investment, but we want to make sure that we've reduced as many risks as possible to make sure the investment is sound. So we then look at providing funding, marketing, promotion, and distribution to really take that artist or take that company to the next level. So you would think of it as a master label that offers label services across those different areas that I mentioned: funding, marketing, promotion, and distribution.
Yeah, and it made sense. But what was interesting to me was the percentage of acquisition in hypertech. I believe 40%.
That's correct.
Oh, why an equity stake of almost 40% in hypertech? I'm trying to understand that.
Well, that's the business model. It's going to be a 60-40 split for all of the companies that we work with. And what we do, we provide upfront monies that so it's really like a buy-in into the entity. And then from there, we then put up the funding for everything that they need across the board. They continue to drive the creative process, but anything relating to marketing, promotion, advertising, PR, we then come in and use our funding and use our resources to assist them. So that's why we would look at getting a significant stake in the entity, because we're providing upfront funding and the capitalization right across.
Okay, has this business model been tested in Nigeria before, or you're just sort of seeing whether it's going to work out?
No, I would say it's been tested in so much as you've got a Kennis Music or Storm Records, where they've invested in artists. Many times they've done, I guess, 50-50 splits, 60-40, 70-30. But I don't think that they had the funding to be able to sort of do multiple projects at the same time, where we're not micromanaging the process. What we want to do is to allow the companies that are already doing well in terms of A&R to continue that process. We may now just add extra to it. We may create a relationship like we did with Two-Face to do a collaboration. So I think we provide, based on having international relationships between the Caribbean and the U.S., we bring more value to the partnership. So you couple that with the investment and the label services that we offer, it makes sense for us to have a significant investment in the entity.
So let's talk about what you've done with specifically hypertech. I'm certainly noticing your moves. I'm hoping that this is part of what the marketing value that you bring to the table with what you're doing with Two-Face, because I'm liking the branding and his expansion. It appears in a way we haven't seen him, and sounds that we haven't really heard him push the boundary on in terms of his flexibility. Is that all part of what you're bringing to the table with this new partnership deal with hypertech?
Yes, exactly. And, I'm born in Jamaica. So for me, there's a natural connection with the Caribbean. And I think when you look at the Caribbean, it's very easy for the Caribbean to connect with African music. So my thought was, if we're going to push the brand into the US, into the UK, the easiest entree into the marketplace would probably be to do collaborations with some top Caribbean artists. So on this particular album, there are two collaborations, one with Sherwayne from Trinidad and one with Marshall Montano from Trinidad. Outside of that, we looked at how could we build up a presence in Francophone countries in Africa. So we did a collaboration with Fally Ipupa, who's one of the popular artists out of DRC. We also did a collaboration with an artist out of France called Kim. And then we did a few others with local artists, in addition to one with Bridget Kelly out of New York. And all of that was to say, let us introduce the brand and do some collaborations that may be below the radar, but they could at least give us an introduction into the marketplace. And then in phase two, we sort of build that momentum up. So we just shot a music video with Marshall and St. Kitts. That'll be the second release off of the album. and we're speaking with one or two companies in the U.S. about doing international distribution with an international edition of the album in the U.S. So there are a few things that we're trying to do where we're really pushing the PR, trying to connect the brand with the diaspora as well as the Caribbean. And then in phase two, we would look at working with some of your more organic artists, like say, for instance, like a Common, a Talib Kweli, a Roots, that sort of fit that's more organic, where you're not pushing a Two-Face or African brand on mainstream, but you're letting it grow organically and kind of building a fan base in the areas where, you'd have solid fans. So there are a few things that we're doing, and we're just in the process of starting, but we've got some really great plans for Two-Face.
It sounds good. And actually, before I prepare to wrap things up, you mentioned the whole organic growing of brands. And I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because over and over again, we keep seeing our African artists, particularly Nigerian artists, because I'm not seeing this with South African artists. South African artists show up here and they expect to do the work. Freshly Ground, I had the opportunity to interview them a little while back when their first nationwide tour here in the U.S. They expect to really grow their brand organically here the way an artist in the U.S. would. But I see African artists, specifically Nigerians, show up, do collabos, and expect to be in mainstream and just go, all over the place. It seems like you're very strategic about it. Yeah, Bridget Kelly collabo with Two-Face, but that doesn't mean we'll be mainstream per se, because it's a relationship build and it does take time to get in there.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. So let's wrap this up by coming back to who you are. I believe that, we started off with quotes and the challenges that you face, but at the end of the day, there's a face behind, the business, and those values are extended into what leads to success. So let's get to know you a bit more. How did you decide to go to law school, and how did you end up in Nigeria, of all places, Jamaican, kicking it with a bunch of Nigerians? You know how that can be from the sports angle and everything else.
Sure.
First, why did you do law? There are a lot of people who want to be entertainment lawyers and don't know where to go. And then why are you in Nigeria now?
Well, I'm born in Jamaica, and I've always been around music and had a love for music. So my first interest was to do something relating to television, film, music, and sports. So in the area that I grew up in, we were close to a lot of artists. Whitney Houston was just around the corner, Naughty by Nature. Quite a few artists were out of the vicinity. Lauryn Hill, the Fugees, just quite a few. So that carried my interest, and I always wanted to have a law degree, because I sort of looked at having a law degree as putting you in a position of being able to effectuate change, and then having a professional degree that no matter what happens, you could fall back on it. So despite the fact that I was very entrepreneurial, I wanted to get my law degree and MBA, which I did. And so right after law school, I started to practice at a small entertainment firm in Newark, where there were a number of popular clients there. And then I subsequently built up my own practice. And I practiced for a while, but then at the same time, I started to manage artists. And one of the main ones I was managing was DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Touch of Jazz Productions. And through that, I spent a lot of time in the studio, because we were right in the heart of Philly, where the big Philly sound came from. They were very much into real music, acoustics, using the Hammond B3 or Wurlitzer, Mini Moog, just real studio equipment. So I got a good understanding as to what it took to manage a studio, and then I subsequently set up my own studio with almost like the same blueprint that Jeff had. And I also started to do a lot of management. So managed Joe Scott, managed Kenny Lattimore, quite a few producers, as well as songwriters. And then that route took me to having an opportunity to take Kenny Lattimore to Africa for Nelson Mandela's birthday. And that was in Johannesburg. And we went over with a very nice crew. We went over with, we had Kenny, We had Drew Hill. We had Shaka Khan. I think LL Cool J. Quite a few artists came over for the very big celebration. And it was my first trip to Africa. And while I was there, it gave me an opportunity to almost connect with a paper I had wrote on apartheid back in college. So it was a really interesting connection. There was a lot of love. Kenny Lattimore was one of the favorite artists of Nelson Mandela's kids. So I had a chance to go to the house, meet Mandela, hung out there for like 5 hours, took a bunch of pictures.
Oh my gosh.
So my introduction to Johannesburg and Africa was just unbelievable. So it gave me an emotional connection, and from that, I just felt like the world was global. It's very easy to stay in the U.S. I already had spent time in Europe. I've got contacts in Jamaica. Why not go to Africa and just try to make a connection and see how we could, create a better connection between urban America and Africa, and do some exportability between the IPs. And that's what led me to spend more time in Johannesburg.
You come off very authentic, very real, and it's really refreshing. And it's also refreshing to hear you talk about both Spinlet, 960, and just generally the African music industry in a way that doesn't suggest that you're just there to hang out till it's all good and then bail out, because it's pretty interesting to take some of the risk you were taking on the continent. Let me wrap it up finally with this last question. What are your tips to AML entrepreneurs generally, as well as the artist, on how they approach the business of music and just generally being about their business?
Well, I think it's, as you said, there's a line of demarcation between being an entertainer and then the business side of it. And what I've always found is that a lot of times artists tend to take on more of the business than they could handle. And many times they don't get the advice of someone who has the experience and who's objective. So I would suggest, one, that you look for a strong team, whether it's your business manager, whether it's your accountant, whether it's your attorney, and query them to try to find out what are some of the mistakes others have made. How can I better protect myself? And then secondly, how can I turn what I do into a business? Because it's one thing to be able to perform, but then it's another to be able to say, what are the revenue streams that I could look at, whether it's from selling music with physical copies, digital copies, doing shows, doing endorsements. How do I create a plan to go from point A to point B? And then really understanding who your target is. You can't possibly sell one thing to everyone unless you're that great of a mainstream. So if you build your fan base and then you take advantage of some low-hanging fruit, which is social media, take advantage of the fact that you've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram, you've got Google Plus, and you've got YouTube. And there's a lot of tips and a lot of ways that you could aggregate those social media entities together that put you in a position where you don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to be able to say you've got to do a lot of physical promotion. You could use those things to kind of leverage the visibility that you have, even if it's among 100 fans or 150. Everyone starts with one fan, and then you have a multiplier effect. So it's how do you best leverage off of social media to get that multiplier effect, and then how do you surround yourself with the best possible team where everyone knows what their lane is. You go into the studio, you write good songs, you come up with the best way to create that emotional connection with the crowd, and then let the people who handle the business give you the best possible advice to, again, help you to tell this story and progress from point A to point B. So I think it really comes down to the team, and then having that enthusiasm and passion to really stay focused with the target market and use that as a base to kind of build and move forward.
Do you visualize Nigerian music particularly going mainstream in the U.S. anytime soon, given all the connections and the strategic positioning that you're doing in trying to bridge that gap?
I wouldn't say mainstream. What happens, a lot of the artists are doing regional music, and they're some are singing in pidgin, some are singing in different languages that even some Nigerians that know big artists, they don't really understand what they're saying, but a lot of people get caught into the rhythm. So the rhythm moves a lot of folks on this side, and the country tends to like upbeat dance, happy music. So what you find is a lot of some of the really good singers and a lot of really good copyrights don't really get the recognition they should in the marketplace because they may be termed R&B. So what we're going to have to do is to get a convergence between the happy music and then the really, really good copyrights to make it more exportable. Because otherwise, if you're doing regional music, unless it's just a mainstream hit, it's just not going to connect sonically with radio stations outside of the country, and then it's not going to connect sonically with the mainstream marketplace. But what we're trying to do is to find those artists that are here that could get some value add from an international artist. So if that international artist has a certain level of marquee value at radio with promoters, by putting the two artists next to each other, it now creates a fan base, or music lovers now have an opportunity to appreciate an artist from this side that they never would have heard or never would have interacted with. So for us, it's a plan. We don't think it's going to be a fast process, but it's a matter of knowing who your base is, focusing on that base, and then coming up with collaborations and performance opportunities that open the artists up to a larger fan base that we think we could then leverage off of to connect with more radio stations, more promoters to, again, build the artists and make them more exportable. So I think it's going to happen, but it has to be real strategic. You know, what you find is a lot of artists on this side want to do a collaboration with a big international artist, but the record labels in the U.S. aren't going to allow it to get played on radio, and they're not going to allow it to show up on an album on that side. So the most you do is you may end up spending a lot of money to get the artist, but a lot of times it's just not an organic fit. It's like an artist is on a track, but you just see that they just don't know each other. They don't know each other's music, and it just doesn't come off as a very smooth production. So we're trying to take a different route, just make a concerted effort to make sure that the chemistry is there and that the copyright is going to have legs that last beyond it getting played on radio for a couple times and then it fades. You know, almost like a Two-Face Africa Queen, something that goes down as a classic. So that's where our headspace is, but we can't control the creative process. If two artists want to get together and they want to make good music, we encourage it. But if we're able to influence the creative process from an international perspective, that's what we're trying to do. Whether it's the Caribbean, the U.S., Europe, anything that any place that we know there are African music lovers within the diaspora, that's what our focus is.
Awesome. So any last words, no business involved, to our listeners before we say goodbye?
That they should continue to listen to your show, read your blog, because you've got a wealth of information, not only from the local side, but it gives a nice perspective on what's happening within the Africa marketplace. So even if you're not traveling to Africa, but you have aspirations to be here, I think by continuously reading and looking at the engagement and the different scenarios you offer, you know, whether it's a case study on infringement, or whether it's a case study on how business relationships go bad, I think all of that in the aggregate ends up informing so that you again understand what the international marketplace is like. So when you do come in, you come in from a more informed, insightful position. Because again, a lot of folks come in and many times there's that arrogance that you're coming from a different area and this is the best way to do it. But you've got to work with the culture. And if the culture is moving at a certain pace, of course you won't want to try to get industry standards, but sometimes it takes time, it takes effort. So you've got to be willing to bend and kind of understand how things are done from a different perspective. And I think that's what happens through your blog and through the through the blog and through this service.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having you on. Such wealth of experience and knowledge, and your ability to articulate it so well. I think often people know, but they can't translate it, and you've just bridged that gap to explain what's going on over there and what's going on over here for everyone, including a lot of industry colleagues. Actually, some of the top names in the business and in entertainment law actually subscribe to the African Music Law blog here in the U.S. So this is very, very good information. I thank you. And thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. I look forward to hearing more updates with your work and what you're doing over there.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Hey, AML people, that's it from me to you. Hope you enjoyed our interview with Mark Redguard. Don't forget to subscribe on www.africanmusiclaw.com to stay updated on when we publish our weekly podcast. Remember, you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and I look forward to our next time when we get to spend some quality time together with our guest or just me talking about legal issues affecting the entertainment industry, certainly celebrity, legal drama, music business, and industry news. Catch y'all later. Take care. Have a great week ahead. Cheers, people.